today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about kept woman versus man keeping. What are the differences? What are the weaknesses? What are the strengths? What does it all mean? Biologically genetic female bodies are built to nurture more. Their brains, their biology are more built to nurture. And biologically genetic male bodies tend to be more linear and more goal-oriented, but that doesn't mean they can't do the job equally well. They're just going to do it differently. The trick here is to move from feeling kept to knowing that you're co-creators. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. I'm your host, Rich Heller, and today we're talking about man keeping versus the kept woman. What is this stuff about? How does it work? How does it not work? And this is part of the man keeping track we've been working for the last couple of weeks. So a mom, 42 years old, says her mom always said marrying a good provider was the dream. Why does that feel so suffocating now? And I'm wondering how many of our listeners are having that experience. The fact of the matter is that though far more women are primary breadwinners today than they were, it's still pretty heavily weighted towards men. And I actually know myself, I've worked with a good number of couples who not only are the men the prime breadwinner, but the wives are stay-at-home moms who are members of the PTA and have, at least for the short term, possibly for the long term, surrendered their professional development. What's the cost of that? Is it suffocation, as this listener lays out for us? The 20th century ideal of women was that they be financially dependent homemakers. Now in the 21st century, we're seeing a whole new experience. Many couples cannot live at the level they want to without dual income, but even more than that, many women feel that they need to individually develop professionally. And I don't think this is just about money. I think that for men and women, for human beings, there is a need to feel that we are participating purposefully in the creation of something better. It might be the creation of wealth. It might be the creation of systems that better help those who are in need of wealth. But whatever it is, we both need to be developing ourselves, our individual strengths, and in the process of developing ourselves, we need to be producing something for our family. And more than that, we also need to feel like we're connected to the wider society and supporting it in some way, shape, or form, unless we absolutely disagree with the wider society, in which case we go live off the grid, which is pretty rare. There was a time in my life when I graduated from college when I realized that the economic system that we were living in, the worldwide economic system we were living in, was incredibly destructive of the ecology. And I thought the only way I can handle this is to live off the grid and not participate in this economic system. And I realized two things in that moment. The first was that I grew up in New York City and I wasn't going to be very good at it. And the second was that you don't have the potential to change that system when you live outside of it. And so I would argue that even if you're living in a system that you feel is oppressive and you disagree with it, you still feel the need to make a difference of some kind, at least in regard to that oppression. So how does that stack up to the statistics? Well, in 1970, 43% of women in the U.S. were stay-at-home mothers. Today, it's about 25%, says the Pew Foundation in 2022. The stay-at-home mother model is outdated from a number of perspectives. First, if we all want to live on the way that we've grown to be accustomed, the level we've grown to be accustomed to live, even the poor in America today live at a higher standard of living than many middle class did 100 years ago. If we all want to live in the style to which we've become accustomed, I think is the real expression, then it requires more than one income, most likely. But also, we all have a need to develop and grow. And I think this drives the unlikelihood of strict stay-at-home mothers at the very least. We also see the emergence of stay-at-home dads. We see dads who are being out-earned, and it just makes sense for them to stay at home. I had considered that myself at one point. I actually have a son who has, somewhere up there, a son who has made this choice. He decided that it would cost more to send his children to school than to stay home and be a stay-at-home dad. And so he's a stay-at-home dad and he earns money through a side hobby that he has. So he has a side hustle that helps him feel purposeful and like he contributes. But his primary mission is to raise my granddaughter. And I'm proud of him. I just want to say, I'm really, son, if you are listening to this, I am proud of you. If you are someone who knows my son, let him know that his father is proud of him because it takes a courageous and enlightened man to see the economic sense of the need to stay home and raise those children. And also, it takes an enlightened man to see that a man can do this in many ways with equally to a woman. Maybe not in the same way, though. I mean, let's be honest. Biologically, genetic female bodies are built to nurture more. Their brains, biology are more built to nurture, and biologically genetic male bodies tend to be more linear and more goal oriented. But that doesn't mean they can't do the job equally well. They're just going to do it differently, and that's the point. Different, but still equal. Still making a difference. I myself raised my children primarily because their mom was not available to be there after school, and I had my own business. And even though I couldn't nurture them in the way that she could, I took better care of them than the after-school program did. It was, in fact, them coming to me and saying, "Dad, we hate this after-school program. Please take us out of it." And I did. I worked when they were asleep. I worked while they were at school. I got up early while they slept and worked, and that's how I made that business roll while I showed up for my kids. And they are better for it, as evidenced by my son and my daughter, who now has a child in her life as well. So, in regard to the stay-at-home dad, a male listener asks, "She makes more than me, but now she jokes that I'm the kept one. How is that fair?" And the truth is that women earn more in 29% of heterosexual marriages, says a 2023 Pew study. And so 29% of heterosexual marriages had the opportunity for the male who's earning less to step in and do what my son did in that instance. Interestingly, though, because we are emerging out of the 20th century into the 21st century, 25 years into the 21st century, this flip is relatively new. And so socially, the expectations of what it means for a woman to be the primary breadwinner and for a man to manage the household have not completely set in. There are times when women are not only resentful that they are carrying the load, but they also feel that their men have become emotionally dependent on them. Now, is this because today's man is inherently immature? I would argue no, not any more immature than 100 years ago. It's more that when you change something, the full adaptation does not always take hold immediately. What am I talking about here when I talk about that in regards to men? What I'm talking about here when I'm talking about that in regards to men is this. For thousands of years, at least hundreds, but let's say thousands of years, men found their social connection and their purpose in being providers, in being protectors, and being servants to their family. Their primary connection with other men was through the activity of either providing or protecting. Now, you take some courageous men who have removed themselves from provision and protection in the sense that they did it with other people, right? For thousands of years, men, as women do now, worked in companies, or they had their own business, or they had businesses where they interacted with other men socially. Men interacted with other men socially through those vehicles. Now they're in the new job of redefining provision and protection as stay-at-home dads. They don't have those connections like they used to. And because they don't have the social connections and they're not hardwired to connect socially like a genetically female body might be, they're less plugged in. And so they latch onto the person who's closest, the person who's most available, their partner. And that's a lot to ask. It's a big load to put on their partner. And thus we have man keeping. Yeah, I'm man keeping you. I pay the bills and you're dependent on me for your self esteem and for you need me to tell you you're doing a good job and you need to know that I love you and I care about you. And you come to me with all your family and I need to manage all your family matters because you're not that good at it. Man keeping. So, what do we do with this? Before we go there, let's just explore a little. Why do these scripts about male roles and female roles, man keeping and woman keeping, or kept woman, why do they persist? A listener asks, why do I still feel like I should want to be cared for? That happens to be a woman, but men feel like that too. She is earning the big bucks. She is paying the bills, but when she comes home, she still wants to feel cared for. And he is looking to her as the leader because she's providing most of the money. In fact, we've talked about this a lot in previous episodes. The person who earns the most unconsciously has the last word in how the money is spent. I can speak from personal experience on this. I want to tell you that this whole series has been just a little uncomfortable for me because I'm not the prime wage earner in this household anymore. I was at one time. Now my wife out earns me. She's out entrepreneured me. She won that game. And as a result, I have less influence over what to do with that money. I used to decide everything. Well, that's an exaggeration, but it felt like I was in charge of everything. And now, basically, I'm carving out my own financial territory so that I could have more influence. And I'm making declarations about, all right, you earn more. All right, you have the paycheck. If you spend money that way, I'm not going along with it. Or let's talk about how we can find some middle ground together. The truth is, guys and ladies, all right, if you're in a relationship where you're not the prime wage earner, if you want equal say when it comes to finances, you kind of got to scrap it up a little because money is survival. Clearing the house, not survival. Changing diapers, not survival. Making dinner, survival related, but not survival. Emptying the dishwasher, not survival. All necessary, needed to have a certain lifestyle. But the fact of the matter is the person who earns the most often has the final say. And so if you want to change that, if you want, it's an unconscious bullying almost. You need to step out of that dynamic and renegotiate it. And there are ways to do that. But maybe that's the next podcast series. I don't know. Like this whole thing of how to deal with, not just deal with money, but deal with the power dynamic of not being the prime wage earner or how to appropriately deal with the power dynamic when you are the prime wage earner. It's huge. But let's stay with this. A man asks, why do I feel less than when she earns more, even though I support her? You know, my friend, if you went to a divorce court, even though she's earning more than you, basically you'd split your assets 50-50, aside from anything that she came to the marriage with that was hers originally that she hasn't mixed with yours. So what that means is the legal system acknowledges that you are together a corporation. Just because one person earns more doesn't mean they're more important. In fact, the legal system recognizes that a person earns more because the other person creates the environment or the ecology that supports them in doing that. And without that support, it would be harder or more difficult for them to do it. It's really important, those of you who are men and women who are not the prime wage earner, to grasp this concept. It's not about who's earning the money. You are a partnership. You are a team. You are creating this together. There is no reason to feel less than. You may feel less than, but that's totally irrational and something to work through. There's conditioning around this. Men are conditioned to the provider identity. I would argue that it's inherent in our genetics to think of, to feel like we need to provide. A way through this, if you're a man or a woman, a way through this is to get the provision isn't necessarily about here's my paycheck. A form of provision is about taking what there is and making more of it. It might be, back in the day, 100 years ago, when it was men as the wage earners and women as the stay-at-home caregivers, a system that was in place was the man would bring home the check and give it to the stay-at-home caregiver, it wouldn't even be a check. The man will come home with a fistful of dollars, or it might be a really small fistful of dollars. It might be a half a fistful of dollars, and then come home with some dollars and give them to that person. And that person had a number of socks. And they would put a certain amount away for rent, and a certain amount away for food, and a certain amount away for clothes, and a certain amount away for taxes, and a certain amount away for the future. It was actually the caregiver's job to figure out what to do with that money. And so that is a form of provision, by the way. When you take what comes in and you figure out how it's supposed to be distributed and make sure that there's an emergency fund and make sure that there's money for college and make sure that there's an investment in whatever the future is you're trying to create, in addition to the rent, the food, the taxes, the electricity, whatever, you are engaging in provision. And so I want you to start thinking about provision in much bigger terms. Women have always been tied to the nurturer receiver identity. Not always, but they've been predominant, is probably the best way to put it. Now, an obvious reason for this is that women's bodies basically are places where babies grow and are nurtured in the body. And when the child is born, the baby is ideally breastfed, a form of nurturing. The female body is pretty much a nurture machine. There's also an argument that the female brain, the brain that evolves in a female body, even if you're a guy in a female body, the brain that evolves in a female body functions differently in terms of emotion, more emotionally sensitive, reads body language better, has better peripheral vision, reads the room faster, quicker, et cetera, et cetera. I was on the call with a woman the other day, and I made a kind of little sarcastic remark, and I wasn't sure if she got it. And I said to her, hey, that was sarcasm. First time we met, I said, that was sarcasm, by the way. She said, oh, I know. I saw the way your lips were and your eyes. It told me right away what you really felt. She knew what I really felt. In fact, it didn't even matter what the words were that were coming out of my mouth, whereas a guy might have taken me very literally. It has to do with the wiring of the brain. Those might be reasons for it, but as I pointed out, men are very capable of nurturing, and it might be that the female body is an ideal nurture machine for the first year, maybe even the first 6 months, but men are perfectly capable of stepping in and taking over at that point and doing it as well, and in some ways worse. It is not that men are not nurturers. There's just that their original body design was not nurturers in early stages. That's probably the best way to put it. I had some pigeons roosting on my patio the other day, and the female, it wasn't pigeons, they were doves, actually. They just looked like pigeons to me. So the female dove sat on those eggs, sat on those eggs, sat on those eggs. One day, I looked out. I should have videoed this, right? One day I looked out, and the guy was sitting on the eggs, and she was just kind of standing there stretching like she just got tired of sitting on the eggs. But the guy was sitting on the eggs, right? How can I tell? He was much bigger. And then she went back and sat on the eggs and sat on the, and now the eggs hatch and they went out, and the male and the female are out there teaching the kids together once the eggs hatched. So the female dove, her body is ideally suited for laying eggs and hatching them. But once they hatch, the male is perfectly capable of stepping in and helping. It happens in nature. It can happen here. All right, so we've talked about the linear nature of male thinking, being goal-oriented. This can be a problem, but guys, if you can take that goal-oriented thinking and apply it to how do I care for my children, you can actually do it in a way that's much more thorough in some ways than maybe your wife will, depending on her thinking. Because let's face it, just because women's brains tend to read emotion better and men's brains tend to be more linear, there are some very linear women out there and some very emotional dudes. We can work at mimicking a woman's integrative relational thinking. There is not a strategy on the planet that cannot be duplicated. We can't necessarily do it as well because the innate skills that a woman's brain has might not be there. Just like we can't breastfeed, there might be micro emotional tweaks that only a woman can do. But since you're not child rearing alone, since she is coming home from work and she is present with the kid, you are taking weekends together, you are taking vacations together, she can still step in and do that. And vice versa. I mean, women have proven that they can be linear. They're kicking our butts out there in the workforce. So the double bind for modern couples is this. A woman asks, if I lean into being cared for, I feel weak. But if I out earn him, I feel resentful. What do I do? And the solution is you got to lean into both. Let yourself be weak. Guys, we have to let ourselves be weak. I read a piece of scripture today. It was in Proverbs. King Solomon wrote it, for those of you who aren't geared that way. This guy, King Solomon, wrote this piece, and it goes something like this. He says, deep sadness leads to deep joy, or something like that. It was something like that. And I really meditated on this, and I thought, I don't like being deeply sad, but I have had in my life some very deep sadness. And it is only in the last few years that I've really allowed myself to experience that deep sadness, to go to bed feeling complete with my partner in the same bed as me, going to sleep, curled up, almost fetal, feeling completely vulnerable and alone and in so much pain for one of my children, for their hard heart, for the pain that they're in, for the anger they're experiencing, and that I can't do anything about it. I am powerless to help them. It's the worst pain a parent can know, is seeing their child in agony and not being able to do anything for them. And I thought, maybe I should read a book. And then I thought, no, you need to have this feeling, because this is the road. Having feelings deeply, fully, and completely is the road to having greater joy. There's a whole series I can do on that too, and maybe I will. But guys, we need to lean. Women are much better at this than we are. But the scary thing is, now that women are working more linearly, more goal-oriented, because that's kind of how corporate rule is set up, they don't seem to be giving themselves as much permission to have feelings as they used to. And guys, you're going to be caregiving. You've got to lean into those emotions, because that pain, that sadness, that hurt is how we connect with our children. And if you really want to be a nurturer, it's the emotional connection that's going to nurture them more than a breast, more than anything. It's the emotional connection, the empathy and compassion, right? When they know that you know who they are and what they're feeling, there's nothing more healing or makes them feel more safe. And so this is part of the challenge, is allowing ourselves to feel weak. And for those of us who are not prime wage earners, allowing ourselves to feel cared for by the other person's supply and appreciating it. They need to know that we appreciate them. My wife needs to know how much I appreciate how hard she works for providing the bulk of the finance for our lifestyle. Here I am busting my butt on my podcast. Doesn't feel like butt busting though. She needs to hear it. Your partner needs to hear it. Whether it's a man or a woman, they need to hear it. They need to know that appreciation. When we do that, we stop being caught between needing to be the sole provider or maybe needing to be punished if we're not. When we do that, we stop feeling resentful when our relationship has gone into a form that our parents didn't prepare us for. What I'm saying, what do I mean by that? When we're entering into a time when relationships are not what our parents taught us they would be for the most part. And so because they don't fit into what they taught us they should be, it seems like maybe there's something wrong with them. It's uncomfortable. Man-keeping, a form of discomfort now. Kept woman, not going to work. The trick here is to move from feeling kept to knowing that you're co-creators. Now, if you have a partner who's emotionally dependent on you, male or female, you have choices. You can belittle them and complain about it on social media, which I see a lot of today. You cannot say anything and just say, oh, well, guess this is the way it goes. Or you could say to them, hey, this is a lot for me. Let's figure out a way for you to expand your friend base. You know, if you're the primary caregiver, then you need to connect with other people of your gender, chosen or genetic, call it, so that you have someone who's having an experience that's relatable to you. If you're a woman who's the primary caregiver and you hang out with a lot of guys who are primary caregivers, there will be some connections. But remember, there's differences in physiology, differences in brain, and differences in socialization where you're not going to connect. So the important thing is to connect with people who have similar physiology, similar socialization, similar brain structure, so that you can share the experiences you're having and some of the things that our listeners have called in that I shared with you. And you can start to get that you are not alone and that what you do has value and start to deal with some of the power imbalances you may be experiencing. Now, some of the principles we've taught in previous episodes, I'm going to repeat them for you, are also we want to be really clear about what our domains of authority are. If you are not the prime wage earner, what are your domains of authority? If you are the prime wage earner, what are your domains of authority? Who's going to manage the money that's earned? It might make the prime wage earner feel better if you're managing more of the money, something we're working at here. Who manages the garbage? Who manages the diapers? Who manages the dogs? Who pays the bills? Who makes sure the roof is not leaking? Blah, 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 blah. All of that needs to be clearly defined. We've talked about that in previous episodes. If it's not clearly defined, it's going to lead to more fights. You want to make sure that each partner has the emotional capacity and the financial understanding to step into any of the roles in your partnership. Why? Because one of you might get sick, or God forbid, the marriage dissolves. You need to be prepared to step into each other's roles at any time, because that's what partners do. They get each other's backs. You need to reframe this as a co-creative experience with two leaders who are sharing the responsibility and authority for a shared vision. Now, if you are kicking each other's butts over this in some way, maybe you're having trouble talking about it. Maybe you're having a lot of feelings that you're just not sharing with each other. A lot of man keeping, the man keeping complaint is about unexpressed emotion on both sides, about the situation itself. I mean, go to our website, richerrelationship.com, and join the free membership, the free group that we have there, and you'll get I think there's like at least 5 instant resources, some trainings, some concepts about relationships that will help you frame this differently, all kinds of resources. A free call with me if you're interested in that. If not, don't use it. It's fine, but there's a ton of resources there. Join that group and there's no charge. And what you will do once you join, my promise is we will send you more podcast information and blog information and video blog information, so which you can pick and choose from. You'll see stuff that you want and you'll see stuff that you won't. We'll just keep you in the loop, keep educating you, keep growing you, because that's what we're about here at Richer Relationship. We are about helping parents to have a synergistic relationship so they uplift one another and their children in the process. That's like the game. The whole game is creating synergy. We're about helping parents take differences and learning to use those differences as strengths instead of opportunities for conflict. All right, that's enough out of me. I probably went way too long here. Have an awesome day and an amazing tomorrow.